This is Theory of Change. I'm Matthew Sheffield. Thanks for joining me. If you pay any attention at all to American politics, you have heard by now about the death of Charlie Kirk, a right wing activist who was killed at one of his events. No one deserves to die for their political views, of course, but there is no question that Kirk was a complex figure and far from the saint that reactionary media and activists have been portraying him as. There is one thing, however, that everybody agrees on, and that is that Charlie Kirk had a phenomenal grasp of how to organize and fundraise for his beliefs. He was able to turn Turning Point USA into a political behemoth with tentacles that reach into all major political issues. For years, here at Flux, we've been trying to warn people about what Kirk was up to and how he was growing his groups. And so I thought it would be good at this point to catch up with a friend of the show, Matthew Boedy. He was last on in 2022 to talk about Kirk and Turning Point, and he's now out with a book that describes the Christian supremacist movement that Kirk was part of. Matthew's book is called The Seven Mountains Mandate: Exposing the Dangerous Plan to Christianize America and Destroy Democracy. And it's very much worth checking out. In our discussion, we talk about Kirk's organizational prowess and how he presented to the public as a self proclaimed free speech absolutist, while at the same time trying to censor and suppress the speech of people he didn't like. We also talk about the future and what left leaning people can learn from Kirk and the organizations that he created. Theory of Change is part of the Flux Media Network, so go to flux.community for more podcasts and articles about politics, media, religion, and technology, and how they all intersect to create our culture. And if you like what we're doing, you can support us over on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/discoverflux, or you can support the show by going to flux.community on Substack. And I thank you very much if you are able to be a paid supporter. That is very helpful. And if you can't be a paid subscriber, that's all right. We do have free options as well. And I would definitely appreciate you if you can tell your favorite podcasts to have me on as a guest on their show. That would be much appreciated. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you. And make sure to click the like and subscribe button so you can get notified whenever we post a new episode. All right, let's get into the program. And joining me now is Matthew Boedy. Hey, welcome back to the show.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so needless to say, a lot has happened since you were on the program last time.
Right.
And of course, just as a refresher, if you didn't pay attention during the intro, we had talked about the last time you were on the show that Charlie Kirk was alive. And a lot of people, not very many people knew who he was or really cared about him in 2022, at least outside of his orbit. But since that, since we last talked, he got much even bigger than he was. I mean, he was already big within the right and got so much more money since we spoke last.
I do think the memorial service really introduced Turning Point to a new audience, a broader audience for the first time, and obviously introduced Charlie for the first time. So they are taking in a lot more money than they've had, and they're obviously have a lot more ways in which they can funnel that money. But I do think that it is there's a new version of Turning Point out there than I might have described in that 22 article or even the book that I have out now.
Yeah. Well, before we get to that though, just talk about, what he had done since we had spoken last. So, at that point, I think he, in 2022, I mean, what was the budget for all of his projects? And then what was
those tax records kind of are delayed a year. I do know that the most recent one was around 100 million. So 3 or 4 years ago, they've risen exponentially during the Biden administration. So I would think that it was somewhere in the 60 million range in 2022 and even further down the line in 2021. But in 2022, they had firmly established their plan to expand. And the plan to expand is this idea of Christian nationalism. They were going to go into all these cultural areas and do many different things besides just the college conservative student kind of organizing. There are arms of Turning Point for all of these cultural institutions that they want to not just play a role in, but to win the culture war. They changed their motto, their tagline, their mission statement, if you will, from being a pro capitalism, free market, anti higher ed, pro gun, maybe libertarian-ish group, all the way through the pandemic from 2012 when they started to now a very specific win the culture war Christian nationalism organization. So by 2022, they had hired staff in Turning Point Faith, which was their religious arm, obviously, Turning Point Academy. They hired a director of their outreach and creation of schools, and that they now have partner schools. They have a media operation, a White House correspondent. They have men's and women's weekends and summits, and of course, they still do these campus events, as we saw at Charlie's death. Those are the bread and butter. And then they also have these semi-annual events, one in Tampa and one in Florida, the Student Action Summit and the AmFest. And let me just say, since 2022, right, Turning Point is all demographics, all genders. It is not just a youth person or a youth group. Yes, some of these events are directed to youth, but there are parents taking their children to these events. There are old people showing to the events. And as we saw in 2024 with Turning Point Action, one of the other cultural arms, they are the indispensable organization now to the conservative movement, to the conservative cause, to MAGA, and to Christian nationalism. They are perhaps unparalleled in right now current conservative causes, but perhaps even before that. If you think of all the conservative, Christian conservative groups that have involved themselves in politics really since the 70s, they might have done one or two of these areas in government and politics. Turning Point is doing all seven of these cultural institutions, and that's what makes them what I think they're built to last. They have all these areas and all this money to spend in it.
They do. Yeah, and actually, that's a great segue to your book topic here, which we should talk about in this context. That so, your book is about dominionism and the seven mountains of society, if you will. So, for people who don't know that term, tell us what those seven mountains are and what
Yeah.
is the
So that
subject.
mountain is a metaphor for those seven cultural institutions that I've been talking about. And I always leave off one of the lists, but education, business, media, family, religion, government. Is that six or seven? I always forget one. But these
Uh,
seven, yeah,
I
these
wasn't
seven,
counting actually. I was looking for you to do it.
I should just bring up the list every time I talk about it. Um, so these seven cultural institutions, these mountains, this metaphor of mountains is retaking the summits, retaking these institutions from anti-Christian forces or demonic forces that have taken over our culture. And if you think about, these this list is not new. They didn't come up with this list themselves. It's a mandate movement that dates back to the 70s with two college ministry organizations that also wanted to influence our culture and came up with this list. And this list has been in cultural sociological textbooks for years. But it's a very specific strategy of Christian nationalism. If you think of Christian nationalism as the broad idea to Christianize America, this gives people direct ways in which to do it. They can go into individual mountains and influence, or like Turning Point, they can be the web or the center of the wheel and extend to all the areas. The culture war is not just fought in DC and in politics, it is fought in all these areas. And Turning Point made its name on campus with higher education, and one of its taglines, what happens on campus spreads. So that's how they sold it to their donors early 2021, 2022, is that we've started on campus and we've seen how this is the problem, and we want to go save, if you will, redeem these other areas. And so this is the idea behind the Seven Mountains mandate that Charlie Kirk is the heir to now.
Yeah, and it's important to note here that they literally believe that their opponents are satanic, like
Yeah,
under the influence of the
yeah,
devil himself. And I think that absolutely bizarre, religious belief. It's so strange that if you haven't seen it yourself, it can be hard to believe that
hmm.
people actually think this, but they do, and like that's what your book talks about quite a
Yeah. I
bit.
mean, if
So I
you think
mean,
about the
just
way in which the president talks about Democrats, that may shock you, but this is even worse than that because
oh, it's so much worse.
right. They see that these areas are taken over by demonic forces, you might communism, socialism, but also intellectualism and secularism. And so we point this out, this kind of divine approval to take back the culture means that A, Satan is in charge of the culture, but B, they're not going to stop. There is no compromise, and you can't slow down. And this is why the Seven Mountains Mandate and larger Christian nationalism was the spirit behind the January 6th insurrection. They see this as each election cycle, but also each kind of culture war battle as a good versus evil, and there's no compromise with evil.
There isn't, and they believe that they have to do this not only to sort of generically serve God, but it's also that to prepare the world for the second
Mhm.
coming of Jesus.
Yeah.
And like, and again, like this, a lot of times when I've talked about this stuff to people, they think it's exaggerating, but this is not exaggerating. This is I mean, there are so many books that talk about the theology behind this, and documentaries. Like anyone who doesn't believe this, I recommend, obviously, besides reading your book, they should watch the movie Jesus Camp,
Yeah.
because Jesus Camp theology is in control of the Republican Party right now.
Yeah, I saw the second season to Shiny Happy People, about that group of people and God's army. And if you think about that group and what they became and why they faltered and why they went away, they kind of died around 2012. And I was telling my wife, I think that when Charlie started Turning Point, even though it wasn't directly a Christian organization at that point, he learned the lessons of all the groups before him and why they did not survive. And I think that group in that documentary did not survive because it was heavily militant. I mean, just the pictures you see of people doing push-ups in the mud for God and then learning how to fight, that did not um, resonate beyond a small group of people. And so I think that Charlie was well aware of the baggage that came with all the things you just mentioned. And trying to say it in a way that isn't as scary. Like he personally, I don't think ever mentioned the phrase the Seven Mountains Mandate. He famously came out in CPAC in 2020 and said President Trump was the first person to understand these 7 areas of cultural influence, but he knew the baggage that came with this version of Christian nationalism. And in fact, Christian nationalism itself, he kind of refuted that term as well.
Yeah. Well, he did. Although I guess sometimes he would be okay with it, right?
Yeah, I
Occasionally.
mean, he said he called himself a nationalist. I'm just saying, yeah, he
Yeah.
didn't like the term being used against him, but he certainly was one of them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things that we discussed last time was that I did want to kind of pick up in the interim. So, here he had started Turning Point, and at that time it was more youth focused in 2022. But his group was one of, I think at least 4 or 5 that right wing groups that target young people at that
Mhm.
moment,
Right.
and as we discussed last time, the Democrats had not really done anything to
Mhm.
respond to
No, yeah.
his group. Did they do anything since we spoke in response?
I couldn't see any, and I've been in Georgia for several years trying to find it. But since the 22 election, the off cycle election was the first election that Turning Point Action played a role in. It was very small amount of money that they put into. 2024 obviously was a much bigger idea, and you think about what 2024 did for Turning Point. It put them on the map as a political kingmaker. They knocked on doors, they chased ballots, they did all the things that a regular party, that is, they've kind of taken over the Republican Party in many ways, but they knew that what's what I'm trying to say here. They did 2 things very well. They chased ballots, they filled out pre-election ballots, and also rallied young people in a way that the other side did not. They are very good on social media. They are very good on TikTok. They're very good at these energizing events. They have an army of staff that really expanded in 2022. I mean, they have field captains and precinct captains on the political side, but they also have Turning Point Faith staff members that go into churches, and then they have the Turning Point Academy people. So they have, and of course, they also have their college group. So they have many people on all different sides of the culture in the young people category. And I wrote something, I forget exactly when it was. I think it was in 2022 that in 2022 they had not changed the voting demographic in the years they have been around. That they have not moved the needle at all with young people. But in 2024, they did. They moved young people, I think 5-10 points, depending on which one you look at, toward Republican side. That's unheard of, especially in the young people bracket. And there was, I don't know, on the left, just again another assumption every year that young people would either are so flaky that they're not going to vote, or B, if they do, they're automatically going to vote for the Democratic candidate, and that was not true at all. I mean, there was some TikTok videos, or I mean, I can't even think of anything else other than some influencers making some videos. It was quite. A contrast between that and Turning Point.
Yeah, absolutely. And these events, that you had mentioned, these are fun events. Like people
Mm.
go to them, they have a blast.
Yeah,
They
no, yeah.
make friends, network. They can get jobs. They can hook up for dates and whatever
They
else.
find husbands and wives too. So yes.
That's right. And so, like, and it makes politics fun. It
Mm,
makes it so that they can have a sense of camaraderie and to be able to meet people, because most people are not super, interested in politics,
mm,
generally speaking. And
right.
so if you are, it can feel isolating and kind of depressing oftentimes, because you're like, oh well, I wish people cared about this stuff. They don't care. Why does not and no one care?
Right.
Well, that's what these conferences were doing, is that they were bringing together
Mm,
people in your region who you might not have known of,
right.
and then you can build something personal, you can build something professional, and obviously political out of that.
Mm,
And that's something, I see that the right in general is very, very good at events and conferences and really driving people toward getting together. And it's
mm,
very bizarre, frankly, as somebody who came over from the right, when I came into left spaces, I saw there were no
mm.
events, basically almost none. And like, I think there is one, which is the Netroots conference. That's
Right.
it.
Yeah.
And
Turning Point.
and it's very poorly, they don't have the money to market it, so it's very, most people have never heard of it.
Mm,
um, and it's the attendance has gone way down, but that's it. Like, there's not really anything out there. And meanwhile, so Turning Point has, I mean, gosh, I mean, you would obviously know better than me, but at least 10 different mega events every year,
right. Yeah.
um, with
Yeah.
tens of thousands of attendees,
I mean, the
and that's
campus
just
themselves,
that organization.
thousands of people. Yeah, the campus events themselves have thousands of people. I was trying to remember, there was a tweet that Turning Point put out in 2024, and it was a picture of a Democratic youth event, and there was maybe 10 people there, and they obviously mocked it relentlessly. But I remember that because there's nothing else, right? There's a couple of young people that have tried to start things on the Democratic side, David Hogg being one of them, but I don't know, he's got lost in the card shuffle. And there's been others, but they really do not have, or did not have, both the, I don't know, personality, charisma of Charlie Kirk, and also the money behind it, which obviously does help. It is strange indeed.
The asymmetry. Yeah. Well, and I think it comes down to, I would say that, when we look at kind of theologically conservative religions in America, or theologically conservative Protestantism, it wasn't always politically conservative.
Mm,
But the Southern evangelicals, just had so much zeal for their ideas that
right.
they essentially colonized conservative Protestantism generally, and then moved on from there to colonize the Republican Party.
Mm,
Because it's what they do. They they are evangelists. They
right.
want to. They are commanded to spread the message, and they psychologically and personally, that is their compulsion. That's what they're driven to do. That's their core of their essence. Whereas their political opponents, they don't really care, and they don't have anywhere close to that desire. And I think a lot of, especially more comfortable organizational leaders on the left, they have this idea. Well, people can figure it out. If you just tell them the truth, they'll figure it out. You
Mm.
can fact check your way out of fascism.
I went to a Turning Point Pastor Summit here in Gainesville several months ago, and at the Pastor Summit, there's a worship night and a worship band. There's lots of singing, but they also have panels on different topics. They had a panel on TikTok influencers, 3 or 4 people under the age of 30 who had gained large followings on TikTok, some doing Christian apologetics, some spreading the gospel. But again, remember, it's a pastor summit. So all these pastors are in the crowd being now persuaded, convinced of how to go about doing this particular thing that they're doing on stage. And it was just fascinating to hear their reasons or their um, how they persuaded the pastors to use TikTok and how they used it. And really, the Christian apologetic things obviously was the most kind of effective route. But I think also Charlie pointed out, it can move into politics easily if you hit the right issues, and you can expand your church membership because of that. I can't think of anything on the other side that was about that interaction between the two generations, and getting people to think about it in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, the localism in these right wing groups through churches is just astonishingly effective. Um, and I think people who are established on the left, they're like, well, I have friends, I have family members, I have fun, I have weekend plans, and it's like, well, not everybody else has those things, and they would like to. And Charlie Kirk was giving it to them.
Right.
He was helping them do it. And so to me, it's no wonder that they were able to achieve that kind of flipping in the 2024
Mhm.
election. And the other thing about Kirk that I think is interesting, and what I'm trying to do here in this discussion is try to talk about some of the below the surface things that instead of the hot
Mhm.
button stuff that he generally was often known for. Which, I mean, obviously there were a lot of terrible things he said, for sure. And we'll get into them a bit later. But the other thing about Kirk, that and I would say Republican elites generally, is that they're very attuned to how to take messages that their more sort of disconnected members are interested in and respond to them, even if they don't necessarily agree with them.
Hmm.
And that, I think, that was a huge dynamic with regard to Charlie Kirk and his rival in the right wing, for the right wing youth's minds, Nick Fuentes.
Mhm.
So Kirk obviously did not like Fuentes, but he knew he had a very instinctive knowledge and personal. I mean, a lot of his chapter members
Mhm.
were fans of Nick
Right.
Fuentes, and so he was in this tension with Fuentes, since Fuentes came on the scene, and pushing his anti-Semitism and pushing his various racist and things. But I mean, but even Fuentes, like, even he has a better idea than past far right activists in understanding that, because like
Mhm.
his shtick when he first came on the scene is, look, we have to lay off the Nazi stuff. We have to lay off of that. And so let's only talk about Christian nationalism.
Mhm.
Like,
Right.
that was how he's framed his message, and it was very effective at capturing a lot of Charlie Kirk's audience. And
No, yeah,
Charlie
Charlie.
Kirk moved in response.
Yeah, Charlie Kirk basically has taken on every piece of rhetoric or comment or message that Nick Fuentes has put out since Nick started ambushing Charlie's conferences and events. I think, when did that start? 2018 or so, and especially on immigration. And there's been nods by Charlie and Turning Point to anti-Semitism, and things like that. But basically, yeah, he saw that happening, and I think that we also see that in the more recent debate on whether or not Charlie was leaving his pro-Israel stance or not. I think that he had a pro-Israel stance, but he understood that there was a significant segment of his audience, of his population, maybe not the donor base, but the audience, that was moving away from that, and he wanted to, as you say, I don't say meet them where they're at, but he wanted to keep them in the movement, but also not, um, you know, disagree with them in public, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. So he kind of gave them openings, implicit openings, like putting Tucker on his speaking schedule and having that panel where they debated the two things. So he was very aware that there was some fissures in, we'll say, the MAGA movement. And I think what Charlie was successful at was appearing as a debater, appearing as a person who wanted to hear both sides, and maybe free speech then comes into the route. But he appeared as this person who was also very convicted in his ideals, which is attractive to many people.
Yeah. Well, and I guess well, let's get into this free speech presentation that he claimed, though, because I mean, he like that's what I unfortunately a lot of people who didn't know him very well or
Yeah,
know his
came
record
across.
very
Yeah,
well, like Ezra Klein is an example,
yeah,
said that Charlie Kirk did politics the right way. Well,
yeah.
you personally, I mean, that this was what got you interested in
Right.
Charlie Kirk, was that his organization targeted you
Mm-hmm.
to try to silence you. I mean, tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, so the professor watch list has been around for several years. I was one of the first people listed on it when no one had heard of Turning Point back in 2016. I was put on for writing a simple op-ed in a paper about advocating against a law that allows concealed weapons on campus. And to be honest with you, in the beginning, I didn't really understood what Turning Point was, but as I learned quickly about them, they put all these professors on this list for various things that they write or said, or maybe teach in class, or maybe wrote a textbook about. And now there's hundreds of people on this list, and they target them in a very specific way. Obviously, they put them on blast in social media, but if you go to my profile, it's my picture, it's my contact information. And then, of course, then they use that to attack the institution in which you work at. They want to defund them, things like that. This kind of, we don't like what this person says, so we're going to target them and their backers or their institutions. I mean, that is the antithesis of free speech. It is not about debating and agreeing to disagree. I think we get in the last few weeks since his assassination, we get these two almost opposing images of Charlie Kirk. Him on campus at the microphone, taking these questions from progressives and liberals and being very kind to them and telling them the truth, but not in a way that they feel bad about. And then we have this other picture of Turning Point and Charlie where they target professors, they target school. There's a school board watch list, and they want this speech to be silenced. They want other people to not participate in democratic society. I think that second picture has gotten lost since September the 10th.
Yeah, it has, and and although on the other hand, it kind of came out also with a lot of these Republican officials, explicitly, like Clay Higgins, who wrote intimidating letters to social media companies saying that, you know, you will remove anything critical of Charlie Kirk, or glorying in his death or mocking him.
Yeah, and
And
there's a list of
and
people.
then you will identify them
Yeah,
and ban them for life. And if you don't, I'm going to bring you before my committee and investigate you. And
yeah,
uh, like this is actually who they are and who he was, and it's important that people know that.
yeah. I mean, that is that's not what free speech is on college campuses either, right? That's not the thing that
No.
they say that they want, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, and it's, I mean, and this is reflects, though, a long legacy within the reactionary American right, of the beginning with William F. Buckley, because he had his God and Man at Yale book. That was his first book, and the point of that book was to tell the alumni of Yale University to stop giving all money to the university because they have, commie professors and atheist professors, and that was his goal. And like Charlie Kirk was absolutely continuing this vein
Yes.
of criticism, but then also he and this in between Buckley's first book and the other ones, they did come up with this idea of the supposed free speech absolutism.
Right.
And I think that's for as a rhetorical trick. So it was like the public face of the movement was, oh, we were free speech absolutists.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you were saying, the private face of it is, well, actually, let's go and try to get everybody fired that we can.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that Charlie wrote, I think it was in 2023, I remember the year, but he wrote about, I think for Newsweek editorial, about this statue of Satan that had appeared inside the Capitol in Iowa, and it was a display. It wasn't an official kind of thing, obviously, but it was a display. It was allowed to be there. So he wrote an editorial, basically, as you just said, saying, I'm known as a free speech person, but I want this thing removed from the state capitol. And I think that moment shows us how he moved from, if you will, free speech on campus, using free speech on campus to his advantage, to this very strident Christian nationalism. We are a Christian nation and we don't want anything said, done, or constructed in our capital that would be against that. And he was slowly, maybe quickly, moving toward that.
So saying that publicly. Yeah. Well, and I mean, as a rhetorical pose, though, it's so effective to have this idea that that I'm in favor of open debate, I'm in favor of free speech, but and then actually not mean it. Actually mean, well, it's only for people who agree with me. But
Yeah.
you don't really say that. And I mean, just like again, like I think a lot of Americans, they do have a strong identification with the values of the First Amendment,
Mm-hmm.
And the right to free speech. And it was I think people they underestimated that, and that's why it probably would be a very good idea for people to who opposed this Christian nationalism to identify openly and much more frequently with free speech, actual free speech,
Right.
because so Donald Trump obviously is trying to stop that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in terms of like the last few weeks, especially the first couple of days after the assassination, leading up to the memorial service, we heard a lot of Charlie Kirk was a martyr for free speech. That turned very quickly into he was a martyr for Christianity. But many people early on called him a martyr for free speech, and that struck me as odd because of things we just discussed. But also they moved. They kind of put that away and moved to the martyrdom for Christianity because it seemed that the martyrdom for free speech did not resonate with the audience they were trying to get, and they wanted to expand to. I think that they saw that as not advantageous to themselves. Whether it was true or not, we don't think it is, obviously. That they did not want to continue that label of martyrdom for free speech. It was interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's interesting also in the aftermath of his death that it's before he died, like while the donors loved him and he had all this money, um, I didn't really see a lot of people actually like Charlie Kirk, like and think he was a great thinker or had inspired them to change their mind about certain ideas or whatever. Like I never really saw people say that, and that it was like the people that liked him primarily were just Republican activists because he was a good activist.
Right. I mean, it was a very personable person. I mean, many people talked about the way he was interested in their lives and inspired them to do things. But no, I didn't see him as a thought leader, if that's what the label you might use there, or that he was a idea that pushed thoughts. Now, he certainly pushed narratives and agendas, but certainly not in type of, one of his books is called the MAGA doctrine, as in the very important word of doctrine, but he didn't really push that doctrine among other things. I think that he was seen as, and maybe because of his youth, maybe that was not the case, and people didn't expect that from someone his age. But it was very interesting, if both with the martyrdom of Christianity, and then it became national hero, civil rights leader, and just generic martyr, but none of it about the ideas. I mean, basically, they said he was a martyr for faith, family, and freedom, but those are kind of empty categories. But no, he was not a serious thinker. He was never posed as that.
Yeah, and I think that that's another commonality that he had with William F. Buckley.
Hmm.
Because there's a biography that came out about him recently, an authorized biography by the historian Sam Tenhouse, and one of the things that's in there is talking about that Buckley admitted that he wrote all these books, but he basically never put any thought into them, uh, and that he tried to write a serious book, but actually stopped because he couldn't do it. He
Hmm.
couldn't finish it. And what he had turned, okay, his book actually was called the Revolt Against the Masses, which, that's truth in advertising, frankly.
Yeah,
Uh,
and the picture you have of Buckley is this guy sitting in a chair doing the fire line with his clipboard, and he sounds astute. I mean, that was not the
yeah.
picture one would have of Charlie Kirk at all. Yeah,
Yeah, but it was still the debate,
right,
the
right.
debate me person. But and like for me, when I have watched videos of him debating, he he's not he doesn't actually engage on the idea. He didn't engage on the ideas. He
No,
engaged
yeah.
more on just using rhetorical tricks and
Hmm.
fallacies, and rather than trying to say, well, you say this, ABC. Well, actually, A is false, B is false, C is false. He never did that.
Hmm.
And this is why he wanted to debate with college students instead of with progressive columnists
Yeah.
or podcasters, I would say.
Yeah, even the videos of the debate he did at Oxford, the Oxford Debate Union. I mean, it was still college students. They were obviously more professional debaters than the people who get to the microphone. But it was the same Charlie. He was just dressed in a tuxedo.
Yeah. Yeah, and the one he did. I'm not sure if I saw the Oxford Union one, but the one where he was trying to do Christian apologetics. Is that the one you're thinking of?
Oh, there were
Or
yeah,
am
there's
I?
multiple versions of that one too. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So like I saw him doing that with some British college debate students, and they just wiped the floor with him.
Yeah, I think he did a Cambridge one too. But yeah, it was a formal debate, and then there was another one like a table thing. Yeah. No.
Yeah, and and I don't know. I mean, there's something, uh, and Trump has kind of the same appeal though, because I
Right.
think to some extent, and this is something that Democrats have struggled with, and progressives generally, and liberals, that you have to be able to get people to feel comfortable with your ideas, even if they don't necessarily agree with them. And I think that that's
Hmm.
one thing that Kirk did with, especially with the events. Like here, he would bring
Right.
in a lot of people, with many of them with very different ideas,
Hmm.
and he wouldn't blacklist them. He would, at the point was, you should support my candidates or my ideas for whatever reason you want. I
Hmm.
don't care. And if you agree with me on 70%, then that's fine. I would like you to agree 100%, but we'll count you as an ally. Whereas that type of ethos, it's very different. Like I don't see that type of idea too much on the political left in the U.S.
Yeah, the no enemies to my right. I think it's a Reagan term, right? There's no disagreements in public. Yeah, that's what he did well. He certainly, had people no longer appear at his events. Candace Owens being one of them, but I mean, he was very loyal to the people that helped him come up in the world.
Yeah, and he still didn't even criticize her either.
Right.
A
Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
of time.
Right. It was a very simple. I just want to go on to new things. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of those new things that he was focusing on, he was trying to do a lot of international stuff as well
Yeah,
before he
so the
died.
week before he died, he took his first, well, not first international trip, his first trip to South Korea. And he spoke at a group called Build Up South Korea, which, if you look at their website and their color scheme and the topics of the panels, it was a proto turning point group. I mean, it's led by a South Korean person who has deep ties to the Trump administration, and Charlie was not the only person they brought over. They brought over his pastor Rob McCoy. Donald Trump Jr. had spoken the year before at this event, and there were many other turning point people that he brought over this year to talk. So it was a very, and if you watch videos of it, it is a turning point event. I mean, there were fireworks and big stages and lots of energy, and he was there to export turning point ideals to South Korea. After that was done, he hopped a plane to Japan and did a rather small event with a very hardline, in my understanding, conservative party in Japan and their leaders to talk about nationalism. That was one of the things, the theme that I saw in both events was like he was talking about the pride in South Koreans for their own nation, and then specifically nationalism in Japan. And some of the video has been shared now after his death by his producer. It was just like he really was there to as a huge celebrity. Like people came to these events to see who he was, And he would walk down the street and people would see who he was. I mean, I think, and that kind of, proves my point of since his death, I've done interviews across the globe from Australia to Europe to United States, of course, and did an interview with people in South Carolina. People, certainly asked who he was, but there are many people that knew who he was in all those places.
Well, and one of the other things about him, I think that is lesser known. Just circling back to this whole satanic battle that he, eventually came to see himself in, seemingly, is that Charlie Kirk had a very strong belief in witches, um, and his wife had amplified it. I don't know if you saw, there was a
Yeah.
rumor that was started after he died that
Right.
a curse had been put on him by witches,
Mm.
and Candace, I think Candace Owens had talked about it, and Megyn Kelly had talked to
Mm.
Charlie Kirk's wife about it,
Mm.
and and they and Charlie himself, when he was alive, he had a kind of an infamous clip on his podcast where he had talked about encountering some witches in Arizona who
Mm.
had placed a curse on him, and he said that witchcraft was real.
Mm. I think that is a direct result of his deepening relationships with people in charismatic circles, with the New Apostolic Reformation types, all the people that he's brought into Turning Point to become a Christian nationalism organization. Those people are very much the teachers of spiritual warfare. That there is these battles of good and evil, and that there are real people embodying this evil, and they have some sort of power that could, do something to you. I think that's a direct result of that. It is fascinating to hear him talk about that. Yeah, I remember that clip when he talked about it, and then you think, what did Erica do in response to the getting of the witches? I think she, if I remember correctly, she had someone pray over her husband or something like that, which is, a spiritual warfare is prayer. That's how you defeat spiritual warfare. It is. He has talked about witches. He's talked about demons. He's talked about and fascinating enough, you wouldn't think that Candace Owens, who converted to um, Catholicism, would also mention that, but she mentioned that too, that she had a dream where Charlie came back to her and said that I was betrayed. This kind of, that is bizarre, but at the same time, you can see where it's coming from in terms of if you're really into spiritual warfare and seeing the physical politics as good versus evil, that spirituality is going to affect everything else you see.
Yeah, and that's why it is really important to understand that this is really what motivates so many
Mhm.
Republican elites. And but I guess another Republican elite that we have to talk about in the context of Charlie Kirk also is Donald Trump. I think as Charlie's organization kept getting more and more money, and at the funeral, Trump seemed kind of it didn't seem to be particularly praiseful of Charlie Kirk, and then I guess also he kind of talked about, in contrast with Erica Kirk, he hates his enemies. I mean, what did you think when you saw
Um,
Trump's eulogy there?
yeah, that was not the best or any type of thing that fit a eulogy from what President Trump said at the end. And of course, he was going to speak last because he's the president, but just the the contrast between the person who came before him, which was Erica's speech, and his, that sealed for me the idea that this was a Christian nationalism memorial service, because you had the Christian part and the forgiveness, and then you had the nationalism part. But in terms of what he said, it was even, I think, even worse than a typical Trump speech, which rambles on and can go on for an hour or so and goes all these different topics. And he is not a very good reader off the teleprompter because he goes off message so many times. He made it about himself so many times in the speech. He certainly talked about Charlie in the beginning, but as it went on, you could see that whatever was written for him, he seemed not to want to say. That is, whatever was on the teleprompter, he seemed to go off it a lot, and I think that was because he knew that. I guess what I'm saying is that he knew he had to say something about Charlie, but he didn't seemed to want to say a whole lot about him. He wanted to frame it as himself and victory and the future and all this. And it was a bizarre eulogy for a memorial service. If it was a rally where they were celebrating Charlie Kirk, if he was doing this at a campus event, maybe I could understand it. But then to also have it contrast with the person right before, I forgive my husband's shooter, and then to not even like applaud for that or like say that's a great, like he just totally just threw it out the window. Like I mean, it was sad and funny and funny in a bad way. And I think it was just another extreme Trump speech that told us exactly who he is.
Yeah, it did. And then I mean the unfortunate circumstances of Charlie's death itself. I mean he, as resurfaced after the shooting, that people had seen him say, well, it's unfortunate, but that some people are going to die. But that's the price we have to pay for having the Second Amendment. And to me, I mean that horrible, horrible irony. It really does kind of reflect, in a very macabre way, this self-centeredness that he did advocate for. But nobody, it seems like nobody on the right has learned anything from that, and tried to say, well, maybe gun culture is bad, and maybe we shouldn't be trying to provoke violence and call people satanic. I mean, Trump literally in the past couple of days said Democrats are the party of Satan.
Right,
And,
right.
like it's like they want, and again, it's just this constant asymmetrical message that they are always presenting, that our speech should be absolute and everyone should be civil toward us and about us, but we have no obligation to dial down our rhetoric. And you see these two faces all the time, it seems like.
No, yeah, I mean they have this list now of social media comments made by professors and workers in public institutions and some private ones that they are getting fired for commenting some horrible comments, yes, but also some rather mundane comments that are just negative toward Charlie and toward his life, and they're getting people fired over it. I mean, it is obviously a direct contrast to free speech, but it is this. You think that they tried to win the culture war by persuasion, by let's convince people that we're right. That is no longer the case, even if it was never true. I don't think it ever true to begin with. And I think that they're using the power they have to win the mountain of government right now, and they're set on winning the other ones. And I think that especially with the quote you talked about, Charlie and the guns, I think it also reflects a deep desire to I don't want to say to be sacrificed, but they know that sacrifice has to happen. And they're not willing to do it, but they're selling T-shirts now. It says, send me, Charlie Kirk. People are wanting to sacrifice something for a greater purpose. In this case, it is saving America for Jesus. And the other side has no such direct motivation, or no such motivation that would send that action so deep as to say, I want to participate as a sacrifice.
Yeah. It's this deep. I mean, that's how deep their religious desire goes. I mean, and it's fanaticism. The idea that you would want to die for Donald Trump or Charlie Kirk or whoever. Like, no, nobody should be dying for on behalf of anyone else.
Right.
Unless it's like unless you really want to. But for a political cause, that's not worth it. Like these people, and certainly they're not helping you. Like, I mean, we see this with Trump's various laws and that he's pushing through. Like we're seeing right now that a lot of rural hospitals are being forced to close because Trump has taken away their money, and then he wants to do it. And Democrats are trying to say, well, look, we have to reimburse hospitals because they're required by law to care for all patients. And if you take this money away for illegal immigrants for the reimbursement of their care, then these hospitals will go bankrupt.
Right.
And nobody, they either don't understand it or they don't care. but it's also it's an ineffective message on the part of Democrats, because I would say most people have not even heard
Mm.
that this is happening.
Yeah, I mean the healthcare generally for people they kind of get at, but like the ins and outs of hospital closings, that's a very perhaps state centered issue that there are several states that it's happening in, but there's no national message that meets the message of people putting up billboards of Charlie Kirk, wearing T-shirts says "Send me," "I am Charlie Kirk," "We are Charlie Kirk." I mean, his death is obviously horrific, but he has centered that group in such a way that you don't see it on the other side.
No, yeah, and I guess let's maybe end on in terms of like, where do you see this going? Because it seems to me that I agree with you that they've kind of given up on the idea of truth. That they know that they can't prove the Bible is true. They know that they can't prove any like evolution's not real. They've actually seems to have accepted, well, we can't argue against the science, so we're going to use power
Yeah.
to take away the budget of the scientists. We're going to use power to take away the budget of the historians and of the literary professors, and all these people, and we're going to give it to ourselves, and give it to our turning point academies. And that's it's I don't know. Well, how do you see it?
But I do think Turning Point itself will last. It will survive and thrive. I think that as long as they can tie it to Charlie, I think that Erica mentioned, just a day after, right, he had this plan for 2030 and had all these things that he was going to do, and we're going to do them in his name. I think that can last several years. After that, after whenever Trump leaves the scene, I did think before Charlie was shot, the Turning Point was going to be the indispensable organization for when Trump leaves the scene, whenever that is. I don't know if that is the case now, but Turning Point becomes, because they have all these 7 areas they can funnel money into, they can funnel people in, they can funnel training into, really has a grip on that part of American society that will take some time to fade, if it does. And I think that, even if they lose the next presidential election, they have these other areas that they can claim victory in, or continue to get victory in. And as we kind of discussed, right, they're not interested in quitting or compromising or setting aside this plan. And this is one reason why the 7 Mountains Mandate plan or concept itself has taken over the Republican Party, even by people who are not necessarily religious, because they see it as the total victory they've been looking for. Will we see more political violence? I mean, we've seen a large trend rising in recent years, individuals taking the matter into their own hands. And certainly we've seen organized violence at the insurrection because of a lost election. And now we've seen the president, who has immense power, seeking retribution in Charlie's name and for various audiences that he's now going after. So we've seen individuals, we've seen cultural groups, we've seen institutions now follow the same pattern of not just violence but retribution, power, amassing power. And I don't know what other facets of our society are left for them to take over, though. I mean, they have them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and people have got to do something. If you don't like these ideas, you have to get your leaders to do something, or get different leaders.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, the
So
answer to the power grab, the answer to the anti-democratic movement that Turning Point is a part of, has to be democracy. No matter how messy that is, that's the only way in which we can go forward.
yeah, I think so. And and I will say one thing that Charlie Kirk, that I would say he did right, is that he did not really reach out to people that were the leaders of the left, but he did with his campus tours and things like that. He was reaching out to the grassroots
Mm-hmm.
left, and that's what his organization, top to bottom, that's what they were doing. And there's, that's where you can make change happen, is at the citizen level, where people, who may not be paying attention to the news, talk to them about what's going on. And tell people how things are going, and because chances are they haven't seen anything.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and and instead of trying to go out and dialogue with various right-wing pundits or whatever, no, just tell people that are normies, apolitical people. Let them know what's happening to this country and to their healthcare and whatever else you want to talk about.
Yeah. No, it's street by street, community by community, indeed.
Yeah. All right. Well, so for people who want to keep up with your stuff, I'll just plug
I'm
the
on
book one
social
more
media
time.
and Twitter and Blue Sky at Matthew Boedy, MattheWBoedy, on both of those. Have a fancy new website, MatthewBoedy.com. And of course, you can buy the new book, The Seven Mountains Mandate, Exposing the Dangerous Plan to Christianize America and Destroy Democracy. From wherever you buy books, it's being published by Westminster John Knox Press and officially came out on September the 30th.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for coming back.
Happy to be here.
All right. So that is the program for today. I appreciate you joining us for the conversation. And if you want to get more, just go to theoryofchains.show, where we have the video, audio, and transcript of all the episodes. And my thanks to everybody who is a paid subscriber. You also have unlimited access to the show archives. And I thank you very much for your support. You can support the show if you're interested on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/discoverflux, and you can go to flux.community if you want to support the show on Substack. We do have free options on there as well if you can't afford that. I understand. And if you want to tell some of your favorite podcasts to have me on the show, that would be great. We're always trying to spread the word, and I do need your help to do that. And so I appreciate that very much. And if you're watching on YouTube, please do click the like and subscribe button so you can get notified when we post new episode. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.